You're listening to the Property Heroes podcast, the place where we talk openly with architects, developers, investors, designers, coaches who help make properties sell faster and sell higher and at a better price. We talk about property because this is our passion and we want to know more about property. And today in this episode, we're joined by Josh Keegan, the founder of Zest Property Management. Hello, Josh. And welcome.
Hello, Rune. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Fantastic, I always say, but
Fantastic services, that'd be it.
So, Josh, tell me a little bit about your background and what your company does.
So what my company is, I got into property about 6 years ago now, and we were one of the first HMO specialist letting agencies. There's a lot of letting agencies out there that focus on single lets. There are a lot of agencies that focus on, say, student properties, and we were one of the first that actually got into the HMO model, which is a house of multiple occupancy, where you have anything from 3+ professional tenants who who each rent a room and obviously share a communal space. And that's quite a difficult area of the market to manage, so we had to create an agency built to manage that. So about 5 years ago, and that's successfully scaled. Now we have over 350 or so units that we actually manage. Team of 12. It's a quite well established agency. And in that journey, like a lot of the stuff I've been doing is to actually grow my own portfolio as well. So I've developed my own portfolio of primarily HMO professional properties over the years, which is managed by my agency, which works really well. And I also do some mentorship coaching and training for property investors that need support and getting grips on their financials and need real financial clarity in their property businesses.
A whole bunch of things, Joshua. I mean, it sounds really fascinating. Let's start with the beginning. Like, how do you get into property? Because everybody in property has a different story of how they got into property. What was the thing that made you see property as a place to be?
Quite simply, it wasn't very considered. I was an accountant before. I got my qualification, and I was looking for something a bit more entrepreneurial. And me and my best friend were living in a flat in the city centre of Manchester, and it was actually him that suggested, like, rather than keep paying rent, should we just buy a place together? And have a room each or get a house together because it just made more sense. So that's really where it started. We ended up speaking to somebody who I knew quite well. He suggested that rather than buy a single let, buy a property and turn it into a multi-let, because there's more money in it, more cash in it, and develop it. So we did that. We bought our first one. We got in, did all the work ourselves, renovated ourselves. Still own that one today.
Wow.
And it really just spiraled from there. So we did that, and then we started the agency, and then it's just spiraled. So every year I purchased a number of properties, and it's just kind of grown and grown and grown quite organically.
When was this, Josh?
This was I was 25, so this would have been 2015.
Okay. What do you consider your biggest win in property? What is your biggest win in property?
I think one of the mistakes that a lot of property entrepreneurs and investors make is they actually think that they like property. I think very few people actually enjoy much around property. They like the returns, they like the idea of property. There's a lot of elements that come into it which are quite. I don't think anyone likes, getting a call from a tenant to tell them their toilet seat's broken. No one likes that element of property being a landlord. So my biggest win has been a mindset shift to very much being a property owner or an investor rather than actually a landlord that's on the ground kind of dealing with all these issues. So for me, the biggest win has been all about recruiting a team and being able to step away from the front line of my portfolio.
Because I mean, that's what we talked about this earlier, Josh. We talked about the difference in like the scaling up from just renting out a room in a property you own, to becoming a landlord, to multi-units, to going from that into becoming an agency, to doing more and more. And what are some of the challenges in that move? Because as you scale, this is where I think that from the discussions I've had with other property developers and managers is what happens in that stuff? Because that scale, that move from one to the other, that transition, a lot of things can happen.
Well, I'm speaking to a man with that experience who's also, you've scaled a business very, very quickly. And I think it's the exact same. It's all the same, really. Like the problems you have when you scale anything are exactly the same. There's no different as property. I think one of the say I'll go into like what the challenges are, but I think one of the things that is a good and a bad thing about being in property is that you still have a bit of a safety net. So if you look at your business doing like fantastic services, you know, there would have been moments where if it didn't work, like if something went wrong, it would have gone under. Like it would have just been a disaster when you were scaling. And you know, you had to make it work. You had to make it deliver a great level of profit for you. You had to get these franchisees. You had to grow at a certain rate because you had a burn rate. You had team members, etc. One of the good things and the bad things about property is that people go in, they scale, but often the business never really fails. So what can happen is you go in, you end up buying one, then you buy five, then you buy 10 properties, and you grow. You experience all the same problems that any kind of fast startup business have, which is like you're overwhelmed, you know, you're stressed, finance issues, you know, team issues, you know, all the stuff that comes with doing it. But your business doesn't really normally fail because you still own the asset base. So worst case, you just literally make no money out of all of these assets that you've worked very, very hard to get to. I think that's one of the best and the worst things about property. I think it's quite hard to fail at property if you follow some very, very simple principles. But one of the worst elements, though, is a lot of people, they don't follow these principles. They end up with this big portfolio that sucks the life out of them, that doesn't really make them any money. And they create like a lower paid, worse job for themselves than when they're actually employed doing the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we didn't actually have those problems, Joshua. We had different problems. It was like we couldn't get enough people to be franchisees fast enough. But you know, I work on a principle called the starfish and the spider, which meant we were always selling one unit out, which meant that actually I used the methodology from the property industry. Is like, how do I build assets?
Yeah.
So each of my companies were an asset inside that. So if one of them should fail, I had three others to fall back on. So, and I think that's the similar to property. I actually took the idea from property of saying, how do I make one part of the business an asset? So, and I think that's a really interesting aspect of it. And I see so many people struggling with their business. They're either tech enabled or they're not tech enabled. I mean, we had services that we were offering that were actually generating money. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a non-profitable year, which is very different in a tech startup.
Yeah, and that's a phenomenal place to be. I think, like you say, though, I don't think many property investors actually have like years where they don't make a profit, but they can have years where they're plowing hours and hours and hours into this, like 7 days a week, and they make less than minimum wage. I think that's one of the traps with property, and that's something that people, unlike the stuff I do, we call this the profit trap. It's just that you get into this place where you're not really making enough money. You plan all of your hours into making this work, and you just get exhausted by it. And these passive investments, these managed assets, stop actually producing what they want for you.
And Joshua, this is kind of like how we connected and how we started talking, because you're in the same thing of helping others. You've actually sort of, you're in the property, but what you've done now is you've created something about, you know, you're with your background of accounting, you've created something to really help property managers and landlords to get out of that trap and move on with this. And that's why I got interested in talking, because you know a little bit about this?
Yeah, well, so to give you, so I've very much pivoted now, moved on. Like for me, I've moved to a place now where I've had a relative success in the businesses I have. Like I've got a very modest lifestyle, but you know, I've got everything I need, and it's a really good place to be. And what I've realized is there's a huge problem in like globally where entrepreneurs just really can't. Entrepreneurs don't know how to gain financial clarity. Too many entrepreneurs, they just don't know what money am I actually making, how well do my assets actually perform, is this business actually paying me for the amount of time that I'm putting into it. And what I've kind of started to really see, and I was there myself, I'm an accountant, and for the first 2 or 3 years of business I was probably asking these questions too. And what I've started to see is that when you solve these questions, when you get these answers right, which is simpler and easier than most people think, but it's like an enigma because most people just can't, you know, it's just a totally different world to understand bookkeeping, finance management, and all the stuff that comes with it. When we see our clients that solve these problems, they have these light bulb moments, and all of a sudden they're empowered and they can do so much more than they could ever do before. For so many entrepreneurs, they spend their lives in this zone where they just think growth is the answer. And they think grow, more sales, more sales, more sales. Whereas one of like the key principles of what we talk about is that more sales don't always equal more profit. So basically, what I do now is, having scaled a number of successful property companies, built my own portfolio, and got to a relative level of success that I'm very, very comfortable with. I've started to help other entrepreneurs do the same. And what we do now is we specialize in actually bringing entrepreneurs from that messy startup phase to, like, they've got the sales, they've done the growth, they've got it coming in, but they've got a leaky bucket, they've got cash going out the door, they're not actually making the profit they want to, and take them into like a high performance industry leading property business. And that's what we do now. That's what we specialize in actually doing.
And that's what I think is interesting, because we deal with a number of landlords and a number of problems. As I've seen from the other side, it's like anything can go wrong in a property. Anything could go wrong, right? It's like it's the number of things we do with anti-viral now, but also about mold and damp proofing and everything else. The amount of things we do, anything can go wrong in a property, and it's also like everywhere from asbestos to God knows what. I mean, and people buying something off an auction they haven't seen. I've just had a really interesting podcast episode as well about how to scale, and I think that if you're like if you're like in the beginning of it, what are you talking to people who's got 4, 5 properties, 6 properties? What's the sort of scale of it?
Well, so I kind of normally help people that have got quite significant portfolios. So I think the reality is everybody needs this advice and guidance, but you have to be in the right place to hear it. When you start speaking to people, like me, when I was starting out as an entrepreneur, I wanted to be biggest, I wanted to make millions, I was going to grow, and over time, like your 3 years of doing it, you're tired, you realize that this isn't really working out how you expected it to do. That's when, and everything's a mess, you don't know how much you're spending, you don't know how much money you're making, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed, like the business stops being fun. That's when you need somebody to say, right, well, you've got the sales, but let's make sure let's put controls in place to build you a healthy business that's going to provide for you now. So although you can work with those people, they're normally not ready to hear it, and they need to get the revenue first, then they start to focus on profit. I guess my typical clients tend to be people that own similar agencies to mine. They've got anywhere from 50 to like 200-300 units on their books, or investors that have scaled quite a large scale portfolio. Those are the kind of people I tend to work with. So they've got the revenue, now we need to make the profit. And normally, once again, like every year, their focus is, right, how do I make more profit in this business? The first go-to answer for most entrepreneurs is, I'll just grow. I'll grow by 20%. I'll double in size. And growth's exhausting. It's very hard. It's very tiring. 9 times out of 10, I do a finance review with them, and I can see how we can double their profit, and they can stay the same size. Yeah. And this is where like the magic happens. And when you start to get entrepreneurs thinking like this, like how can I be the smallest possible company but have the highest possible margins? Like that is the code to crack. It's not how do I be the biggest, it's how do I be the smallest possible with the highest possible margins. And that's what I help people achieve.
Eat like a mouse and crap like an elephant, right?
that's exactly it.
So I think this is a really good small business philosophy, and I was like I said you're in a very interesting space here, because I think that it's I always, very often when I speak to people in properties, like, it's accidental, right? It's not meant to be. It's meant to be a sideline. It's meant to be passive. Then it's accidental. Then suddenly it becomes the business that they're in, and suddenly it becomes the only business they're in. And suddenly it becomes overwhelming because the number of things that can go wrong, and management and everything else.
Yeah.
So I think you're in a very interesting space, because you're in that phase of past owning a couple of properties into building a portfolio. Then suddenly this is a full-time business, and you start having employees on board. And then we know what happens when you have employees on board. Things start moving at a different pace.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting place you're in there.
But it's like a mindset shift as well. Like so I imagine there's like the people I work with wouldn't dream of doing, it's still a mindset shift. The people I work with wouldn't ever dream of, I don't know, not paying for maintenance. So they would always, like, the people I work with would go, I'm not going to go, like, somebody calls up, they need something sorting, they need a light bulb sorting. They get something right. They use a company like yours. They bring up their own contractor, and they value their time. So they just get that sorted. And that is the mindset shift. Like the lower level landlords, they're still running around like maniacs. They don't really value their time yet. they need to build the revenue, and once they build the revenue, they can start really valuing it, see how it's all going to work. And then the mindset shift is how do you increase your hourly rate, like minimal time in the business, maximum reward, and that's what we work on. That's what we work on doing.
We had the discussion yesterday on another podcast. It was about like one of the big things we do is end of tenancy, pre-move or post-move in, and it's like sometimes that's a £200 job, But as I said, doing it right means that first of all, the flat will rent out faster, and you can maybe do £50 more a month. But they don't see that as it's a £200, and they'll go and scrub it themselves. The clients go in there, and then suddenly they have 5 viewings instead of just one, because it's that kind of.
It's all just a false economy. Like we do like, I don't know, 20 to 30 move outs a month. We just can't, and like it's not like we're like, all right, we've got 30 now. We can't do it ourselves. We get people in like yourselves to do it. It's not like we had that mentality, and like now we've got 30, we've got to get somebody else. That's always been the mentality. Like even when we had 1 or 2, I was never going around doing any of that. Like I wouldn't go anywhere near it. It's like that's low value work. That's something that we pay other people to do, because I'd be focusing on growing the business, generating more profits, starting a maintenance company, and all the other different elements that kind of bring more revenue through the front door, building a brand, building relationships with our customers. There's so many important things. So valuing like that is like a total step change when you start to see like you don't bring people in out of necessity because you can't afford the time to do it. You bring people out of necessity because your time is so much more valuable than the time you would be spending doing all those things.
It's about valuing yourself, I guess, right?
Yeah.
It's about valuing yourself in this. And then I was like, so how would they get started? Like, because I know a lot of landlords right now with, XYZ, the interest rate might change, this might change, that's going on. Should I start a cleaning company, trying to make profit on that? And we also know that we had a lot of landlords who started the cleaning company and said, oh, we'll use you. And then they started a cleaning company, they came back and then said like, valuing their time and saying, well, okay, maybe it's a little bit more expensive per job, but then I don't have the overhead of doing it because that needs someone on the back of it. So that kind of frame. So how would you start with it? Would you go in and do an analysis? Would you take me through the process?
What? So if somebody approached me and said, Josh, I want to get my business from, I want to generate more profit in this business. Like, how do we do it?
So let's say I call Joshua the profit doctor here.
The profit doctor, the profit coach. So we have a 5-step process primarily. We basically got 5 profit problems that you need to solve. So there's 5 problems you need to solve. The first is clarity. So we need to have before we start anything, we need to know what your numbers actually are at the moment, not on some spreadsheet that you've drawn up or some calculations you've done. We need a cloud-based accounting system and a finance team. So that's where we always start, like absolute clarity on your numbers. This is inexpensive. Like the companies we use and our back office team, you pay on an hourly rate. And for somebody that's got 5 or 6 properties, you're probably looking at about £100 a month. It's inexpensive. And then we look at like the actual business model within that. So we then go, bro, what's your actual business model look like? Where do you want to get to? It's not arbitrary. Your profit figure is basically your salary figure. So what do you want that to be? And we work it all back. So that's profit problem number 1. The second is then consolidation. And that's where we look at the structure of the business. And normally 9 times out of 10, property investors and owners, they understand that they need systems. They understand they should try and organize things better. So they've normally got like 5 logins to 1 login to Trello, 1 login to Basecamp, 1 login to Asana. They've downloaded 3 different inventory apps and tried to use, and they end up using none of them. So the next step is like choosing our 4 systems. So we've got 4 systems that we use: the brain, the toolbox, the integrator, and the controller. We get those in place. So we clean it all up. Once you've got an organized business and the consolidation phase, we then go through the capacity phase. We actually bring people in to run that business for you. So bring in your team. Once again, people worry about this. Oh no, it's expensive. I can't afford to. We're talking about lower end, virtual assistants that cost you £2 to £3 an hour. So it's so affordable. And then we did look at the control phase, which is then, right, we've got all this in place. Most entrepreneurs get all this in place. They get excited. They've got more free time. And they just go on the next big opportunity. They don't put the control phases in. The control phase is all about how you actually manage all of this business with a really high value, low time commitment. How do you manage all this very, very effectively while you can step on and do other things? And then the fifth phase, which is where most entrepreneurs spend their lives, they don't do all the rest very well, is capitalize. So we've got all this in place. Then what are we going to do to drive pure profit into the business? And like, this is where we focus on doubling our hourly rate. So if our profit currently is £1,000 a month, and we're going to be spending 10 hours a month, 100 hours a month managing that, our hourly rate is £10. So we would then look to double that to £20. So we look for opportunities which are going to double our hourly rate. And yeah, that's what we do. That's our 5-step process. So clarity, consolidation, capacity, control, and capitalization. That's where we operate.
No, it sounds. I mean, when you say this fast, Joshua, with this passion, it sounds like it's really simple, but I don't think it is. I mean, and I think because you've got XYZ going on in that property, you've got XYZ going on there. You know, the cleaner didn't turn up, whatever it is that's going on, or the tenant didn't pass the CRB check, or whatever it is you're doing on the reference check and so forth. You know, all of those things. I mean, you know, it's like we know enough about these things. So it sounds very simple when you say it like that, but I guess it is really helpful to have that coach and to go through that.
Oh yeah, 100%. You need all of it. Like actually, within property, none of it's overly complicated. It's just there's just a lot to do. There's just a tremendous amount to do. As you said, you've got anywhere from maintenance issues to auditing cleaners to tenant failing referencing to spare room advertising. Like you've got the whole of it to do. Right. So the mantra is do it once, do it right. So everything you should be doing as a landlord would be all around building, like as you said, like building assets. So building a training guide on how to dominate spare room, building a training guide on how to contact fantastic services when a maintenance issue comes in, building a policy on referencing. That's what you should be spending your time doing, is building these assets, and then you should be distributing them through your systems to your teams. And that's how it all works, and it works very effectively. It's not straightforward and easily, but it's there's some sort of mantras and some ways of doing it to absolutely nail it.
Yeah, no, but it sounds to me like there's a whole property ecosystem that I didn't know about. You know, like there's a lot here I'm learning, so it's really interesting, Joshua. Joshua, in the spirit of the property heroes, we always talk about the good and the bad, right? So can you tell me of something that a mistake you made that you learned the most from, probably?
Mistake I made that I learned the most from? Yes, I can. So one of the biggest mistakes I made, and this does come back to what I do now, I would say would be around thinking that if I grew, I was going to have a more successful, profitable business. In around 2017, we luckily got the opportunity to actually double in size. So basically, in 2017, I think it was June 2017, we were given the opportunity to essentially double in size in 1 month. So I think we were on about 70 units at the time. We were going to go up to 150. So it's massive growth. Like you're in the top 2% of UK companies for growth if you're doubling in size each year. That's very fast. So we got this amazing opportunity. We working hard. We took it on. And we were like, well, we should do this because we thought it was going to solve all of our financial worries. We thought when we got out the other side, we have this double in size portfolio, and we were going to be like raking it in, absolutely creaming it in. We thought this is it. This is what we've been waiting for. And I remember we did it. We spent 3 months doing it. We spent 3 months getting the properties filled up, getting everything onboarded, recruiting the team around it. It was absolute chaos, like overwhelming and chaotic. And I remember sitting in the car. We actually booked a away day or away weekend to celebrate with some of the team. I remember sitting in the car, and I actually got an email through from our bookkeeper at the time, and they sent through our P&L report, and we were actually making a loss. So we actually doubled the size of the business. We were actually making a loss, and for the next 3 to 6 months, we had to put money into the business. So that was one of the biggest mistakes I ever made. It's like thinking that more revenue was going to just bring out more profit, thinking that if we doubled in size, there was just going to be this, it was this silver bullet. And it was like, it was naivety, it was entrepreneurial optimism, and we were totally focusing on the wrong things. Like overall, it was good that we did it, but there was just a huge mistake and a huge learning on my part.
Yeah. Well, I always find that it's like sometimes in those mistakes, I mean, you know, they always say like to be an entrepreneur, you have to be slightly crazy because you have to do those things. And then you have to be able to recover from it, right? Because that's what actually makes you grow. Because if you hadn't pushed that, you know, now I always think it comes back to defining what you want out of your business from the beginning.
Yeah.
right? Like, what is the result you want? I mean, you know, and then there's a coach I listen to a lot. So like, what do you want to do? Do you want to grow big or do you want to grow rich? Right. What I like is the mix of the organization, then taking it like great by choice, is choosing the growth stuff here, Josh. So it's I love hearing that from you. And the same, I remember those years, you know, like, oh, let's just grow like crazy and chaos everywhere. And then we learned how to build systems, how to get the software right, how to make sure the operations were running smoothly, how to make sure that every single thing had a rule and everything is
Yeah.
online training, you know, fantastic services. And this is one of the things that I like about the franchises, because you get to replicate that.
Yeah, I think you're actually spot on. It's like, it comes back to what we said before. It's how small can you be with the biggest margins, and that'd be the biggest learning from that. Like, because yeah, it's not fun having a big business that doesn't make any money. That's really not very fun. It's much more enjoyable to have a small business. Get your ego out of it. Take your ego out of it. Have a small business that makes a lot of money, and it's quite, you got lots of free time. Like, that's definitely the place to be.
What do you think make us make those mistakes? I mean, you know, what do you think makes us make those mistakes? I mean, do you think it's pressure, peer pressure? Is it?
Well, I think there's two things. I think because I see it still, like in a lot of my clients, we're still having these conversations where a lot of my clients come to me. They've grown like a really successful agency. They've grown in terms of the rooms, and visibly on social media it looks great. You know, they're smashing it. You know, they've got more and more, and they're just sitting here going, but this is actually not. It's sucking the life out of us in terms of time, and really we're making like a minimal, or probably less than minimum wage doing it, with all the risk associated with it. So I see people doing it all the time. Like, what makes that happen? I think would be, I think it's three things. I think one would be the highlight reel, the Facebook highlight reel, and people perceiving that, oh wow, look what they've done. You see all these entrepreneurs on Facebook and all that, just talking on stage about what they've achieved. And if you notice, they only ever say, oh, this is a multi-million-pound company. So that's revenue. That's revenue. What does profit look like? And with people don't really talk about profit. I think one element is like, you know, I could have told you at my agency at the time that it got to X amount of revenue. It would have sounded great, but I wouldn't have mentioned the fact we were actually making a loss and having to put money into the business. So I think the highlight reel is one thing. I think the second thing I'd say is just entrepreneurial optimism, and that comes down to ego a little bit as well. So it's like, as entrepreneurs, we all have an ego. We all want to achieve big things, and we like to chase the big money, and we want to tell our friends and tell everybody about the big money that we've achieved. We want to get that turnover figure. So we say, like, this is it. This is what we've achieved. So I think ego really pushes us there, and I think ego can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. It can get us places, but it can get us in a very unconsidered way. It's not an intelligent way. It's just like an egotistical way. I think the third is around actually having financial clarity. Like, if I had what I have now, which is a finance manager, that I could have just said, look, we're planning on doubling. What's this going to look like? He would have been able to tell me that we were going to make a loss. And I'd have gone, right, well, that's not really what we're set out to do. So we may have still done it. We would have done it and known what the answer was going to be, or tweaked the way we were going to do it so that we actually achieved the profit. And I think those three factors pushed me to do it. But I do think at the same time, every entrepreneur needs to get out their system. Everybody needs to do it, and you just got to get out your system and do it. And then you learn from it on the other side, as you said. Like, I think one of the benefits of being entrepreneurial is that you don't think too much about what the result's going to be. You just optimistically think it's going to be great, and that gets you like 50% of the way. Once you've got to that point, the next 50% is like, right, how do we actually make this work now? Because it's not.
No, it's so refreshing to hear, Josh, because you're very honest and open about this stuff. Because it is like, and we all go through that as founders, as entrepreneurs, as this stuff. We all go through that because there's years where you're just not making money. I mean, you know, it's like you're working absolutely to the max. You know, 20-hour days. You know, everything is chaos and so forth, and then you get the clarity, and it's one of the reasons also why so many businesses fail, I guess, because at one stage you just have to push through things that others haven't. You know, that's times when you go like, oh, how do I put money back into it? You know, like, should I write a second mortgage? You know, how leveraged am I? Should I, you know, plow my credit cards into the business again to do the stuff here? I mean, you know, Fantastic Services was not my first one, so I've learned it the same way. It's the fifth or sixth one, so it was a different story this time because we've had the egos, we've had all these things, and said, okay, well, we're growing 300%, that's great, you know, but if we do that next year, we're going to die, you know.
Yeah.
So having the decision on that. But a good saying that I said, like, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, right? Because
Yeah.
there really is this stuff. What your EBITDA matters more than what your turnover is, and we saw, okay, well, the turnover didn't grow that much, but the EBITDA actually improved, but also we had a more pleasurable business. So it's sort of like, do you want to grow big in the revenue terms, or do you want to grow profit?
That's another really good point. Is what you said. You had a pleasurable business. Like you the most pleasurable businesses are, as we said, as small as they can possibly be with the highest possible margin. And like the smaller it is in terms of like a unit basis. Like so, like investors, for example, if you could have five high cash flow and HMO properties, 6 bedrooms, all producing £1,000 to £2,000 a month of profit, that'd be a much better place than to grow to 100 rent to rent rooms with £150 per room. Like one of them is incredibly noisy, one of them is very small and very manageable, and you'll get much more pleasure out of the smaller one.
Yeah. Well, and how do you get into it? Like, let's take the step back and say, like, because I will tell you a little bit of my property story. Was that I did never believe that a 2-bedroom flat in SC1 in Bermondsey would go over 250,000, because that was like the limit. Right now I know what it's worth, and I know this kind of stuff. So yeah, that's a big one. So
Yeah.
I never thought that it would go with that, and I said, like, well, okay, I made 100,000 on it. Wow, that's enormous growth, or I think over 3 years, it was enormous. There's times when it goes fast. How do you get into it? Like, how do you start out? What would be your, if you went back in time and said to yourself, like what would be your first steps?
First step is always around strategy from my perspective. So it's all around, because like when you say you're going to get into property, there's hundreds of ways you can actually get into property, ways you can do a property, and it really depends on what you're actually trying to achieve. Like you said, Rune, if you want to, it's what's the output, like what I'm actually trying to achieve, and it's the same as the business. So what am I trying to achieve in the business? Okay, well this is how I'm going to get there. So what do you want to achieve? Like there's kind of 3 different plays you can make, and one of them is like, do you want like a high cash flow strategy? Do you want do you want to replace your monthly income? In which case you want to be doing things like service accommodation, HMOs, rent to rents, multi-unit properties. Second is, you want like chunks of profit. Do you want like bonus money? So you've got a nice cash flow income, and you want like a bonus money, which would be 10 grand a sourcing fee. So you source on a deal, you do a development and make 20 grand, 50 grand, 100 grand. But it's not regular. It's like it's chunks of profit every 3 months, 6 months, a year. Or third, do you want something for your pension? Do you want like a long-term pension play? So, then you'd go and buy your flat in London that you're going to buy and hold, and then sell it when you're in 50 years' time, because it's going to double, triple in value. So the first is like, what do you actually want to achieve? Because if you want a pension asset, and you go and do yourself like what I do, which is high-end professional house shares, which earn like good profit, but it's not a pension asset because it's noisy income. It needs to be managed. It's not passive income; it's managed income. You don't want to do that, and there's quite a lot of notional equity in it. So although it may go up in value, you're going to be managing it for a long time, and you have to shift in market. If things are going to change, you can't rely on it. Like it's more of an active strategy as opposed to a passive strategy. So you need to consider that. So the first place to start is go, what do I actually want to do here? Like, what do I want to what do I want to achieve? Cool. So I want cash flow. Great. What are the strategies that can provide me with cash flow? HMOs, rent to rent, service accommodation. What are those things? Then you look at, right, well, based on that, what would my area work as? Like, I live in Brighton. What's going to work around Brighton? Well, SA could work really well. So service apartments could work really well. Plenty of holiday people. Well, there were plenty of holiday people going to Brighton. So I'm going to go for that. Fantastic. And then just choose a strategy and just go for it. Like that's like, and honestly, like, just go out, find the deals, and just get started.
Yeah. That's a little different when you when you first came to when I first came to the country and so forth. You know, with no credit history, those things were a little bit harder, but it's still there. So you know, but it's really nice to hear you break it down like that, Josh. I mean, I think both for experienced guys and for beginners, I think it's a very good way of understanding the breakdown. How would they now before we go into how they would contact you and where they find you? You know, and this is a kind of a tricky sort of question in this because it's like we can't give financial advice, right?
Hmm.
And nobody has a crystal ball to going on what's in the future. For the listeners who might listen later, we're right smack in the middle of a lockdown from COVID, second lockdown in London. You know, if you're listening to this, this is 2020. You know, we're right smack down in the middle of a lockdown. We are seeing property prices going up. We're seeing the stock markets outperforming the prices they ever have. The Dow is up higher than it ever has. The interests are at a low that we haven't seen for this. There's talk about negative interest rates, and you know, God knows what's going on, right? The whole world is at flux, and one of the things I asked is like, because this is a thing with property is like, you know, the fear of, oh, there's going to be a massive bust, because I've seen people, you know, we started in the past recession, we did the ups and downs, we understand this stuff, we understand the reinvention of a new recession, we understand that change is happening, right? It's not a recession, it's reinvention, so we understand that. So the sort of thing, like, without the crystal ball, what's happening right now, Joshua? I mean, what's
It's good. I mean, it's a good question, quite a holistic answer. In terms of what's happening, there's been a bit of a boom in the market from this year for prices actually going up because I think people are seeing there's opportunities. More people want to move out of their flats in London into the countryside, given what everything's going on. We're seeing from like an actual lettings market perspective, we're seeing like it's right now it's quiet, but it's been quite a busy year. It's quiet now because we're in lockdown, but it's been quite a busy year. Regardless, you've got more people losing their jobs, more people going on to DSS and benefits tenants. So that's potentially in the market to explore. I think there's no answer here, but I think the key sentiment would just be it's just a shift. There's always demand for housing. So from a purchasing perspective, there's always the market will always go up long term. So if your strategy is if it's a long term strategy and you're planning on buying a house in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years till you die, then it's a good time to buy. Like there's no issue with buying because the market, it's like the stock market. It may jump up and down, but it'll always be slowly, steadily up over the long term. So from a buying perspective, that will work. And there's some great opportunities as well. From a like lettings perspective, I think as always with the lettings market, it is a market and it's all around. It does shift, it does adapt, it does mature. So you just need to look at where is there going to be demand, like now and long term. So more and more people are losing their jobs. So if you can cater for DSS tenants, you're probably going to have be in a good place. There's going to be
students moving out of central London. I mean, the universities don't have the foreign nationals who comes in now. Right now, it's completely shut down. Whether that's going to go on for 1 year, 4 years, or longer, who knows?
Who knows? But that's the thing. Like, it's just looking at all the different trends. Service accommodation at the moment, you could argue that it's more challenging because there's less people going away for weekends. When we get past lockdown, there's probably going to be more people going away for weekends than there ever were before because people aren't going to want to go abroad because of all the turmoil and all the challenges. So we're in a bit of a dip at the moment with lockdown and uncertainty. But I actually think that we're in 4 to 6 months' time. We'll be sitting here. I think there will be a bit of a crash in terms of prices, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't buy. Like just buy, get good deals, and hold on to them for long term. I think 4 to 6 months we'll be sitting here, and I think the market would have pretty much, from a letting perspective, sorted itself out. The only thing I wouldn't do at the moment is take a punt on be too heavily reliant on exit values. So if your strategy is trading, if you're going to buy something to develop and then flip on, right now I would suggest that's a risky game to play, and I'd leave that to the professionals and people that really know what they're doing, because the sellers market, I'd say, is uncertain. I would be a bit more dubious about that. That's the only part of it I wouldn't be looking into. But if you're going to buy and hold, then I think you're fine. You're all good to go.
No, I think there's the years when it goes up. It's a bit like I think if you compare it to day trading or to investing, are you investing in index stocks? Are you investing in
Trackers, yeah.
day trading? What's going up and down. I mean, it's like those are fluctuations. I think the idea of having a relatively good portfolio of different things, but also understanding, a couple of things. I had a really interesting question for you because you said something about a maintenance company, Joshua, and it's like now obviously fantastic services and the size of us and the number of maintenance jobs we do and the services we do. Um, you know, how big do you have to be as a property developer before that's worthwhile, or is it actually worthwhile? I mean,
So we do have our own maintenance company, but only because we have 375 rooms.
yes.
So if you
Right.
imagine, and we're established enough to do it, like, so it's not something I would suggest you do at all, really, until you get to a point where you've got an established portfolio of rooms. So the only reason why we do it that way, and we still do use external contractors as well. What we have maintenance company for is more like the general handyman style roles. But we still use external companies for cleaning. We still use external companies for gas and boilers, and anything specialist. We have a maintenance company, but it just does our in-house portfolio. So we don't do anything for anyone external. For our own portfolio, our managed properties, we have that company which we started about 2.5, 3 years ago, and that we basically pay a day rate to our team, and then we recharge that out to our landlords. So it's a good little earner, but it also adds to the service because we can offer better service through controlling it ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm always saying. I mean, like one of the things that I firmly believe in is this thing about adding value to whatever you do.
Yeah.
Whether it's the rental, whether even if it's MTOs or MT, as you said, then even if it's that, you've got to add a value to it. Also, you've got to keep the renters. So, I mean, one of the things that people very often, if you're new in this stuff here, but the property market. I mean, I'm from Scandinavia, where the property market is not like this. There's very, very few multi-unit landlords because there's a regulated flat cap on how much you're supposed to do. So that's how much it is per square meter, and that's it. This
Yeah.
flat cap and this stuff here. I mean, it's not in the UK, which is why prices are going the way they're going. But that a lot of people said, like, oh, but it can't go much higher. I mean, it's like we're at the peak of this stuff here, and then there's going to be a second boom. There's going to be a second bust. I remember the predictions about the previous bust, and the percentage wasn't more than 20. And if you held on, it recovered faster than you could blink your eyes. It was just a matter of if you were squeezed to that point. And that, I think, comes down to what you said about clarity, knowing where you are, knowing where your financials are. And as I always said, like, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you don't know whether you're too leveraged. It's one of the big things we were talking about as well was about leverage. Like there's a couple of golden rules for it, but it's a personal choice as well how leveraged you want to be on your property, right?
Yeah, it certainly is. But I think once again, it just comes down to clarity. When you have like everything set up, so you can actually see how much interest you're paying every month on debt, what your debt, your loan to value is, what your gearing is across your company, you can then start to make some really good decisions, but also the right decisions. I mean, there's like debt is in the like. I think the earlier you are in your property career, I think the more debt you tend to have. So in the early days, it's all about, it's aggressive, it's growth, it's debt, like grow. As you start to mature as an investor, I believe anyway, and I certainly start to do this, I'm less bothered about getting all the money out, and I'm happy to leave money in because overall I'm trying to bring my gearing down. Because this is like a long-term thing for me now. It's not just, I'm not just grow. It's like, now, right, let's look at the real wealth that's in this portfolio. But that's a shift. And I think you only get that shift once your cash flow is taken care of and your lifestyle taken care of. Then you start to really focus on the balance sheet and look at, right, well, how do we start to play the longer-term game?
No, it's really interesting to hear, Joshua, and it's so refreshing. I mean, as we're doing these property shows and we're interviewing more and more, I'm learning something about property. I'm learning, I'm learning a lot. I hope our listeners are learning too. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, Joshua. And finally, I mean, the way I always ask is like, how do people get in touch with you? Yes, you'll have a profile on the Fantastic Services Podcast Heroes blog, But how do people get in touch with you? Should they?
The best way to do it is connect with me on LinkedIn, Josh Keegan, or find me on Facebook, Josh Keegan. That's the best way to contact me. I've also got a group called The Profit Process. So if you want to search that and request to join, you'd be more than welcome to. And yeah, it'd be an absolute pleasure to reach out and connect with all of you. Yeah, on social media.
No, exactly. I think it's worthwhile. I mean, what Joshua talks about in a nutshell was the nice simplified way of understanding the 5 steps in order to understand your business, so you know where you are. It's something that I always advocate. It's something that I'm super interested in, because if you don't know where you are, then you don't know where you can go, and you don't know what you can achieve, and you also don't know what's next, which is like a way of being prepared. So I think, it's worthwhile, and it's been a real pleasure, Joshua. And I'm so happy you had time to join us with all your property portfolio, and well done. I mean, it's an incredible business you've done, and I really like that you're giving back to this and helping other property developers, and not. It's a bit like in the franchising industry, where we don't see competition as anything but a community where we can learn from each other. Because yes, you're competitive with these, but it's also the process of learning. So it's really refreshing to see, Joshua. And thank you very much for.
Thank you very much, Varun.